right, good evening, everybody. I hope, as always, everyone has a fantastic morning, day, afternoon, evening, night, wherever it is, whatever your time zone or your sleep schedule may be. It is evening in Ohio, and we're starting another Tech Talk Thursday. Easy for me to say. Joined by PX Lip again. Say hello.
Evening, everybody. Hope everybody's having a good, as Prof said, morning, evening, afternoon, whatever it is, wherever you are.
And move your audio up
Yep.
just a little bit.
Yep.
You looked like you were a little on the soft side there. All right. So a couple of housekeeping items. I feel like I'm in class and going through the, I used to do that at the beginning of class. A couple of housekeeping items. I've tried to get a few things organized. So the main one is that I now have a website that isn't at least totally awful. And most importantly, there's a Twitch tab that will keep a running list of our episodes and what we did here. I'm still working a little bit on this, but some of you may have noticed the Twitch VODs get auto deleted by Twitch after about roughly 2 weeks. That's because of I'm on the lowest tier account with Twitch, and so that's kind of how it works.
We are kind of new.
Yeah, we are kind of new. So the I'm recording the streams as well as streaming them, and I've now kind of gotten my some of my pipeline, some of my workflow in place here. So episode one, which is about 4 weeks ago now, is now on YouTube. There is a YouTube link in the about panel. Twitch doesn't make that easy to find, but there is an about button you can click, and in that panel, if you look down there, there is a link to both the website, and there's a link to YouTube directly. But I will put up links to the full episodes, and depending on how much time I have and what we talk about, sometimes I will also pull out shorter clips. Obviously, the full episodes will run about an hour and a half, like the streams do. Sometimes, if there's something we talked about that I think is maybe kind of a little bit wider use, then I'll pull that out, and so there might be some other sort of short clips in a separate playlist, and I'll link those here as well. And as we go through the next, I don't know, weeks, months, we'll talk about that a little bit more. So what it'll actually take to build this application we've been talking about. As we do that, that project will we'll kind of flesh out. We have a page here that will kind of flesh out what we're going to do with the project, and so there'll be links for the Git repo and a bunch of other things. So there's some more resources, and again, like I said, if you look in the panel on the about section of the Twitch of my Twitch channel, the links are there to find all of this. And by next week, I'll have chat commands for that as well, but I don't have those right this minute. All right. The other thing that PX Lip and I talked about is what we're going to do for the next several weeks. And I will try to remind everybody again at the end of the stream. So there'll be a 2-week gap until episode 6. Because next week is the U.S. Thanksgiving holiday. Next Thursday is the U.S. Thanksgiving holiday. And so we will take a break there and resume in 2 weeks. So just a heads up. But for these streams coming up, when we work on the LST project, which we'll define a lot better during today's stream, what will happen is we'll generally take about 20 minutes, no more than half an hour at the beginning of a stream to maybe talk about some current news, some piece of tech that or some piece of software or a networking issue or a network tool that I ran into that I want to talk about, and then we'll take roughly an hour to go through where we're at of the project, what's going on, what components we have, maybe we'll do some demos, and maybe do a little bit of setting things up and kind of putting finishing touches and connecting things together on stream. We are most likely not going to do a lot of on-stream coding because that gets kind of boring, and it's also very stressful if you're doing it in a compressed time frame. That said, PXFlip may do some of the coding on his channel. And hello there, ODG, welcome. Yes, we have an old depressed gamer raid. If you're in Twitch chat, please make sure that you jump over there and give him a follow. Welcome, ODG. Good to see you. So so as far as the actual coding of the project, what we're likely going to do is go through what we did over the past week. What the status of the project is. Maybe do a little bit of putting in code here and there, but we're not going to do a lot of on-screen coding. But PXFlip may well do that in his channel. If he does, I'll post him on my channel and put it out. Put out a note on Twitter. So please follow me on Twitter. That link is also down there somewhere in the About panel, and you can find out when he's live and is doing some of the coding. And I might join him on stream every now and then when he's doing it.
I hope so.
So
we can treat these weekly ones as like our we'll talk about it later, but
right.
as like our agile stand-ups.
Yes, I think that's a very good. Yes, we will need to define that in just a moment.
Yes.
Right. So the only thing I wanted to do leading up to that sort of discussion of how this project is going to function, and again, I think we'll repeat this again, but I want to make. I think it's a good point to make right now. We are going to build what we think is an interesting tool. It's something that both PXFlip and I are very interested in because we're interested in Twitch and streaming and esports. We know, I know ODG has built his own custom overlay and has a keen interest in kind of building neat stuff. Yes, ODG was in chat was saying the weekly catch-up and progress meetings. Yes, that is exactly right. So I think I want to make it clear that this tool we're going to build, the local streaming tool, we're not claiming it is unique. It's never been done. Although I think we're going to do some things in ways that people maybe have not tried. But the interest here is twofold. In the end, we want something that's useful and that does some of the things that we would like to see when we do our streams.
Little things, useful.
Yeah,
it's always good.
Useful. It's always good. But also at the same time, some part of the purpose of these streams is to really take a good look at modern project management techniques, project tracking techniques, coding techniques, the way the internet distributed data is structured, the nature of APIs. So we could do this with a whole bunch of different things. In fact, weeks ago when we started first laying this out, we had a bunch of different ideas, but the point, so part of the point of this is not necessarily building something that's totally unique, although it will be available if somebody thinks it's useful. But at the same time, we really want to find out. Can we build these tools? Which tools, which code development and software development tools work really well for us? What can they do? What can they not do? Where are the problems? While PXFlip could have predicted this, but for example, my little adventure with the CORS cross-scripting restrictions in the browser last week, those are things we want to find out. And we want to see what's possible. We want to see what's possible with modern tools, with modern software development tools, and in the end, have something that's fun and usable. But at the same time, we will want to have learned a lot about different tools and techniques. So, this whole thing is going to serve a dual purpose. All right. So the one thing I want to do today before we launch into describing LST and going um, and going and going through through some of the design issues here. If you remember, and let me pull it up here. So last week before last and last week, I built first the simple JavaScript a Hello World program. I built the one that makes an API call to the server over in the other room. There's some Python Flask code on that server, and right now this lives on those two computers, and that is not a good thing to do. What I really need to be doing is, especially if we have more than one person working on a project, like in this case, PX Lip and I will both although he's going to do the lion's share because I'm not a web developer, he is. We want to be able to both contribute to the project, and of course, clearly that is the case in most modern projects. You have team projects that involve multiple team members, and we'll talk a bit more in the second half of today's stream about the techniques for managing projects nowadays. And they a lot of times they tend to focus on deploying many times, incrementally many times, and so we need tools and techniques to manage that.
I think it's GitHub that this is for many years ago, but so probably more now. But they used to talk about, I think they would deploy once an hour, sometimes more.
Yeah. Okay.
So all day, every day, all day long.
That seems a little excessive, and that seems a little excessive in some ways. But so speaking about GitHub, that's the platform we're going to use. It's quite common. It is free. It is very good. Remind me. I've worked with Bitbucket, which is owned by a different company. Bitbucket's part of Atlassian.
Yeah. So
and I worked with them because
their pricing model was different.
Well, and when I was a university employee, my access to Bitbucket and some of the other Atlassian tools was free as under an educational license. So so I started with Bitbucket. What's the GitHub is a
GitHub changed their model as well now.
What is their pricing model? Because my private account is still free, right? I mean, I'm not paying them anything.
GitHub used to be you would pay for private repositories.
Right.
That was basically their shtick. Anything public was free. Anything private, you paid a couple of bucks a month.
I remember now. That was the reason I went to Bitbucket, because
private repositories
they had the same model, except private repositories were free for educational accounts.
No, they were free in general. It's just it was up to a certain number. They might have changed it somewhere in the period.
Yeah,
at some point they were free in general.
This is way back.
At some point they were free in general, but you could only have 3 collaborators on them.
Right.
Before you started paying. So it was the user model versus GitHub's repository. GitHub has now switched. They're user based. You pay for users if you want certain features. A lot of it's around action minutes.
So essentially, GitHub's pricing model is, once you need a true team, so you and I can collaborate on GitHub and still do it for free, right? But at some point, if our team was larger, will we have to go to a paid account? Or if we
eventually,
wanted
because
features?
So there's a couple of features that you don't get. Sorry, I saw the word CVS repository and my heart stopped.
Yeah, oh God, that's where I started. CVS. So
at least you could do SVN,
especially for the
do SVN.
Especially for the YouTube crowd. So Old Depressed Gamer, they don't see the
Oh,
chat.
I apologize. Yes.
Old Depressed Gamer said, I think I still have an RPI card with my local CVS repository set up somewhere. I started at CVS and then switched to SVN. And
if people say CVS, and my first thought is not, oh, that's a repository method. No, that's where I go to get my
repositories. Yeah. Okay.
No, don't get me wrong. I tease, but it was a
Yeah.
very good
So
tool at the time, ODG.
but
Um,
for again for yeah, won't be ODG said yeah, won't be reusing that. Oh, I liked it at the time. Had SVN as well. It's at one point. Yeah,
yeah,
that's I used SVN quite extensively. So
I think I
the
came in right
yeah,
at the end of SVN's
SVN, yeah.
dominance and the beginning of Git.
And so we'll talk in a minute
That dated
about.
me a little bit,
Yeah,
didn't it?
we'll talk in a minute about a little bit. Well, actually, I should do it now. Let me do this now. So uh, so we're talking about code repositories. We're talking about cloud storage or server-based storage in many cases um, for code you're developing, and especially for collaboration purposes, but also for
Specifically, we're talking about like
yeah, yeah,
version controlling software because it's
right,
it's really very useful to be able to look back. Um, there you go. The ODG mentions an idea is to merge YouTube comments into Twitch and vice versa, so that you get the context for both. That
yeah.
that's that's
That
tricky, but
that
fun.
that would be
Um,
fun. Yeah,
so talking about sort of versioning of code is really especially at a team level or an enterprise level, it's very important because it is really useful to look back at how things came to be. As much as it's funny, their Git has an entire tool called blame, and it just gives you the opportunity to see when and who last touched a given line of code.
yeah,
And so it's useful for, honestly, it's useful if something breaks. It's much easier to roll it back if you just have to check out an older version versus what did I change?
yeah,
Crap.
yeah.
Because
So
every
yeah,
web dev has done that at some
all right.
point before they learn.
So the general idea is that in any code versioning system, I have some file with lines of code, and if I make a change and add a line of code in this case, whatever it may be, uh, there's a record of that in the repository in various ways, so that I can go back and either say, give me the version before I inserted this, or give me a report that shows all the changes that were made over the last week or month or whatever it may be. So that's really useful, and the way the way the older uh, code repositories worked. So those were code versioning system (CVS), and that's not the pharmacy.
Yeah, they were
And SVN
centralized.
was subversion, and I'm not entirely sure what the acronym stands for. The actual tool was called Subversion. What happened is all of the hold on a second. Let me grab a highlighter here.
SVN is actually just a shortening of Subversion.
Yeah. Okay. So I was wondering about that. So in CVS and Subversion, all of this code resides on a central server. Um, so this is server based, and if I have my let me grab a different color here. So in order, if I'm using CVS or SVN, I will create a directory on my local machine and check out code. And there's some different rules about whether the code gets locked in the central server so nobody else can touch it. I know CVS did that. I think SVN does it as well.
Yeah, I think it did.
So I have a copy of that file up there now lives in my working directory, and I can push it back up when I'm done and unlock it. So let me create a new frame here. I think I did that right. So we've been talking about Git, and there's I'm not going to write it up here, but that's of course what GitHub gets its name from. There was a competitor to Git called Mercurial, which is very, very similar, and the two just basically got developed almost simultaneously, and they're just essentially with some preferences. They developed slightly differently on different platforms, and so I'm part of a project still that uses Mercurial because there was a heavy population of Windows users back 10 years ago, and they swore that that Mercurial worked better for them than Git. So, that's how we ended up with it. But this Git and Mercurial work differently. They're called they're they're meant to be distributed. So the idea is that in my local directory, not only has a copy of the working files, but in fact, if I make changes into the file like I did before, those get tracked here locally. So I actually have an entire there's essentially a hidden area here that keeps sort of track of metadata and make sure that, for example, I could roll this change back, or I could have two different branches of development going on simultaneously. That's all on my local machine. And the initial idea, although I have not actually seen that done very much, the initial idea was that someone else who's maybe a collaborator of mine could have basically the exact same repository. They do their own stuff, so they have code and they do their coding, and we basically send in an organized way send code back and forth. I haven't really seen that used very much. It is possible. I mean, you could have two individuals or two people that do that. Now, remember, there's no checking out or locking, so there's a fairly elaborate merging process. If both of us change the same file, we're going to have to figure out how we merge those changes together, and that's actually a big part of that. So what happens more commonly, let's do this. What happens more commonly is that we agree to house basically a master repository somewhere else, and so we communicate via a master. It's called an upstream typically, or
origin,
or an origin. It's a remote direct. Generally, Git calls these connections remotes. And you can send code, you can receive code, you can be selective about what you send and receive, you can merge. The reason this makes more sense is sort of, if you think about it in a more generalized way, if you think about what happens, and I'm just going to try to use a little out of colors here, but so what happens is if you have like two people, they need a connection between them. Then this third person adds two more connections, and you start adding people, and suddenly all of a sudden you have to create lots and lots of connections to make this work, right? If you're just connecting to your coworker's repository directly. So what people typically do is this central repository becomes kind of the master, and then everybody connects to it sort of in a star configuration. So if I add somebody, all I have to do is have them connect to the central point. It's kind of like networking in some ways. All right, so by way of explanation, then that's how modern code development is usually organized. And GitHub is one of the places where the central repository can live. And so in my example here, if I wanted to make this code, my Hello World code, available to somebody else to work on, or to use it for their when they're trying to learn stuff, so I really ought to put this in a central place where it can be retrieved and worked on. Let's see, ODG said we had multiple teams just doing that job across the globe. One code base, lots of projects, each project lots of different sub-projects, each with a branch for each team. Yep, a bit of a nightmare to keep track of. We had employees whose sole job it was to be the Git expert. Yeah. For large teams, that can get pretty interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I will say that's. I'm sure lots of people do it. I would say in the open source community at least, and sort of I think in more web first .com-y sort of where it's companies, that approach is probably not the way they would approach it. It tends to be especially now, lots of smaller code repositories with lots and lots of branches, but none that are specific to a team. They're all specific to features, right?
Yeah,
Typically,
right.
branches revolve around features or bugs or something like that,
Yeah.
so that you're more interested in the change to the code, not who wrote the code.
Yeah. And by the way, what you said, sorry, I would try not distract. Please distract
It's
us. That
distract away. That's part of the fun.
yeah, this is part of the fun. Please, by all means, keep distracting us. We love it. Right. So I've got to do a couple of things to make this happen, and I think we have a couple minutes to do that, and then we'll switch over and go back to looking at a bit more at the how the code development works and how we're going to manage the LST development here. So I wanted to sort of quickly go through what happens. So I have my GitHub dashboard open. And I have a couple of repositories. There's the one that PXLib is shared with me already. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a new repository for the for this so I'm going to call this Hello World Apps. Okay. Okay. And so this is what we talked about earlier, and I probably ought to make this a little bit bigger. So yep, there we go. So this is what I talked about earlier. I can make my repositories private, or I can keep them public so everybody can see them. In this case, I'm going to leave it public. Obviously, if some company's developing something that's proprietary, they would keep it private. I do want it might as well have it create a README file for me. That's usually a good idea to do that. I'm not going to do a git ignore file just yet because I don't know what I want in it yet. Those are files that we want the code versioning system to ignore. Then in a moment we're going to talk about licensing. ODG says each team is really a feature team. So I guess for the web there's only one target, really, the browser. So I guess it's a bit more of a flat structure, right? Right. Git ignore should have anything that has your. Just git ignore will have your stream keys and things for testing. So yes, obviously you don't want to push things into a public repository that.
The number of breaches that have originated from someone accidentally committing a secret to a Git repository somewhere publicly
there's
are
probably a lot
far
of
too many. Oh, GitHub has in last year at Universe they announced, or last year, beginning of this year, this summer, I don't remember. At the GitHub online conference this summer, I think. They announced they have an entire project around scanning every open source every public repository for accidentally committed secrets. And so you can opt in, and it will constantly scan your repository
so make
for
sure you don't screw
accidentally
that
committed
up.
secrets because it happens far too often.
And then there's some mundane things like Mac OS has these hidden files that are basically directory search files.
I hate the the DS store files. I hate them.
DS store files.
I hate them.
So there's generally things that you want to get, you just don't want to include, and so that would, and then if we made code public, then we can choose to attach a license to it, and this is kind of a new feature. I really hadn't used that before. So it means that if somebody copies the code, which they're obviously welcome to do if it's public, they would have to adhere to the license that's attached to it. You said you had a favorite out of these. There's a whole lot of them.
There's a boatload. I tend to go with MIT.
Right.
MIT basically says do whatever the hell you want with it. Excuse me, language. I actually managed to tone that down at the last. I managed to tone that down at the last second, so cut that a little close. Do whatever the heck you want with this code. I just accept no responsibility if it breaks something for you.
Yeah,
which is typically it's one of the most copy left licenses you can grab.
Yeah.
It's
I
also
think
one of the simplest.
I think ODG in your country would say not fit for any purpose. I'll go ahead and pick that one, and that should be enough to create the repository. And so, there's a license file. So what it did is it created a license file for me, and it created a README file, which it populated, I think, with the name of my repo. So I'm not going to worry about that too much.
In Markdown.
Yeah, and it's a simplified markup language called Markdown. Way too clever by half.
It really is, but it's far too useful to complain about it too much.
Right. No,
I
it's
like
very
this.
useful.
The license essentially is worth what you paid for it, as ODG said.
Yes, exactly. So let's just quickly wrap up this part then by taking a look at VS Code again. So I should now be able to go to. So I'm in my directory, which VS Code unfortunately doesn't show a path that I to where I am. But it's in my development directory where I put this stuff. And so I've got these two files in here. If I go to the source control tab, the VS Code will say right now I don't recognize there's no version control being implemented in this folder, so it will let me do that. So keep me honest here, so in this case, because I already have the repo on GitHub, I initialize the repository here and then connect it. Correct?
Correct.
All right. So we're going to do that.
And this is all just cheating. Typically, if you're much more interested in learning all of this is all just running CLI commands. So git init just got run and it set some logical defaults.
Yeah, and so normally, well, not normally, but if you were doing this with a command line environment, there are obviously there are actually commands that ODG just said, "Be right back. It is time for a bio break for him. We'll welcome you back in just a moment. Go do your thing." All right. So what do I need to do next? So the first thing I need to do is I have two files that are shown as untracked, right? Because I've never actually put them in the repo. So is it as easy as put a message in and Control Enter?
So yes, in theory. What I would do though in this case, just because you did, and this gets into the whole distributed version control thing. Things get a little bit exciting. You don't want to add anything to your head, which is head is a Git term.
It's the front of the master branch. Yeah.
Yeah, you're on, well, especially now because you're actually going to end up with a main branch.
Right. The main branch. That's what I meant. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, and here's the thing: you haven't changed it locally. So what I'm going to suggest: add your remote first.
Okay. Pull it and then commit.
Yeah. So because you added files already, there's already Git history.
Yes. Okay.
So if you create history here, you'd have to do some.
You have to merge it.
Finagling.
Yeah. Okay. So the next thing would be to bring up my palette, right?
Yep. That's how I do it.
And the top one is git add remote, which we want.
If not, you would start typing add or git add.
Yeah. And let's see. Hello World apps. It figured it out. So that's the one we want.
It's pretty good at that.
Did it do it?
It wants the remote name, so you just want to give it origin.
Oh, that's right. Okay.
So now I would go ahead and pull, and we're gonna. This is this is the joy of doing all of this live. There's actually some trickery we're gonna have to, not some actual trickery, but we're just gonna have to clean some things up here. So if you go ahead and actually just go back to the source. No, you don't need to go back to the source control branch. At the bottom left, it shows you which branch you're on. Currently, you're on master.
Right.
So we're actually going to go ahead and click on that, and you'll see it'll pull up the drop down, same sort of as the command palette. It should be showing you the origin stuff. Why isn't it? Head back to the source control. I've never had that. It's been so long since I've had to do this. And just hit refresh at the top.
So I should be able to pull from the origin, right?
Yes. The only problem is we can't pull from master. Master doesn't exist on your repository. Main does.
Okay.
So we just all we're going to do is we're going to pull down main, merge master into main, and then you can delete master. Not to get into anything more, but GitHub and a lot of the open source community has kind of agreed on, hey, we're going to get rid of master. It has certain connotations.
Right.
Whether you agree with that or not is
but it does make it complicated because that's what the Git command line tools do. Okay.
Well, and they're switching it as well, but because they are a binary release, until you update Git, and you have to manually set it. So that's one thing you can do is just
so
match
right
up
now
with
I don't
GitHub.
have anything committed yet, so I could switch.
You should be able to just switch. You should just be able to switch branches. Actually, yeah, if you just create a new branch, you should be able to just do main and then track it. Yeah.
What is the Git command for this? Git.
You should just be able to do branch.
Branch.
Yeah. And then let's see if it'll let you push it up.
What I want to do? Git create branch from or create branch?
Yeah, let's just do create branch from. Let's see what options it gives you.
New branch name. Is it main with a capital M?
Yes. Nope. Lowercase m.
Like that?
I'm a few seconds behind. Yep.
What is a ref?
Yeah. So
head.
So yeah, this is head is what you want. So that's where do you want it to point?
Git fatal. Head is not a commit, and branch main cannot be credited from it.
Because so
we've never committed anything.
Yep.
What would you like me to do?
Yeah, that's fun. We're starting to get into messy things.
So I could pull the remote repo. That would populate main.
Yep.
And I would have to switch to it. So can we do that?
Yeah, let's do that.
Hey, we can always delete stuff and start over, right? So can I do?
Yeah, if you do the command palette, do this for me. Look up git fetch. I think fetch is in there.
As opposed to pull?
Yeah.
Oh, right. Okay. Git fetch. Do we want to do that?
Yep. Let's do git fetch. Let's see if that will actually, because that hopefully will actually bring in the fact that, hey, we've got the.
Do I want do I like code to periodically run git fetch?
That's up to you. I probably have that turned on. I don't remember. I've had VS Code for so long.
I'm going to say ask me later. Okay.
There you go.
Now
I think we should be able to check out main and commit directly to it, so we don't have to do any of these shenanigans.
So how do I do that?
So if you click on where it says master at the bottom left, that's your branch switcher.
Yeah,
there it is.
That's a remote branch.
Yep. So if you select that, what it will do is it will run the command. It'll git checkout origin/main. Only there's some extra stuff in there, so it'll tell it, hey, I want to track main. My local main branch should track the origin's main branch.
Right. Yeah.
So when I hit git pull, it knows where to go.
Okay.
So now we should be good. You can add hello and
we're on main.
Yep, we're on main. So if you go into the file browser now, you'll see the README and the license file should both be in there now.
All right. Let me catch up in chat here real quick.
Yep.
GitHub is like Linux. ODG says GitHub is like Linux. You have to take a course in CLI commands to do anything. Git is a CLI. Git is a CLI. Yeah. ODG says also I like the fact it is integrated into the VC tool. Yeah, very much so. Been so long I can't remember how to use Git now. The good news is I've used it for years to keep track of my class materials. And in fact, I did not use GitHub because I could have accidentally pushed things like grades or something, which would be bad. Which would be a FERPA violation. So I actually ran my own server. I have a VM in the VMware architect infrastructure of the school that is my upstream. But that's how I've organized my slides and exams and all sorts of stuff for a long time. So I can kind of muddle my way through. I just haven't done it out of VS Code in a long time.
It simplifies some things and it makes others more complicated.
So if I go to the file browser, there they are. There is the license file, the README file. Remember, those were the files we created in GitHub when we created the repo. We've now pulled them down. So now I should be able to commit these two files if I can figure out how to do that.
Yes.
So normally on the command line, I would do a git add star.
Yep.
Do I do that here, or do I
No.
do that
So
in
if you go back to the source control,
Right.
the source control tab,
Yep.
if you hover over any given file, or at the very top, yep, there's that little plus. So it's called staging. Git
Yeah.
add
Yeah, that's it.
stages your changes.
Git add is the staging. So let's go ahead and do that for these two files. Okay, that's that. And by the way, if anyone's used the git this is to use the git status command. That's what it would look like. And so I want to add this guy here.
In
so
fact,
now
if you ever want to, you can go pull up the output tab, which is it's hidden by default. But the output tab, there's the git output. You can see every command it runs.
How does one get to? Is there a view?
Yeah, under view, I believe it's view output.
There it is. Output.
Yep.
Oh, it's down here.
Yeah, so it pops up there, and then in a little drop down, tasks is the default, but
Git.
So back under output. Yep.
There we go.
So
okay.
That's it. Running commands.
All right. So now we have our two files staged for addition. So now we have to commit them.
Yep. And Git wants messages on everything. So you've got the little text box.
Right.
Type in your message, hit Control Enter, and it will have committed.
Oh, I don't have user.name and user.email.
Yep. They want that. They really want that these days.
So how do I get that in here from here?
So I always do it. I don't know that VS Code will let you do it. I've never done it. Tried to do it through VS Code. So apologies. I should have had that thought. I always just pull up the terminal at that point.
Which one? You
can pull it up right here. So if you go back under View and open the terminal, you get an integrated terminal, which makes things nice and easy sometimes.
Terminal. There we go. Okay. Oh Lord! Now I've got to remember those commands to set the
Just all you're looking for is git config user.name and user.email.
Git config user.name, is it equal?
I think it's a space.
Space.
Yep, it's a space, but you want to wrap that in quotes.
And then it's a string, right?
Yep.
Actually, might as well stick with Prof Cruiser. Okay, that worked. And so now I want to do user.email.
But user.email. Yep.
Okay, let's see if it takes it now. See, this is good. And
it's always fun when things go wrong.
This will become a teaching video for the students in the classes I teach. All right, so let's see if we can. All right, there are no unstaged changes now.
And now what's useful is it gives you a status. So down at the bottom left, next to the branch name, it tells you, hey, that you have no commits in your origin, and you have one commit that's ahead of master. Or ahead of main.
Explain that a little bit more. I think I'm seeing it, but so there's
so where it says 0 down, that tells you, hey, there's nothing on your remote. The tracking remote branch that has changed since you last pulled.
But there's one commit on our side here.
On our local branch,
right?
That is not on the remote.
All right. So what's the magic incantation to push this to GitHub?
I would pop the command palette. So Control-Shift-P, and then you can just start typing git push. Or heck, I think you probably just type push.
Git push.
There it is. And then you can see down the bottom left again, it's doing a thing.
Oh, it wants me to sign in. Okay. Why would it
Ah. Oh,
authorize?
yeah, that makes sense. Yep.
Let's see if that worked. Yeah, it looks like that worked, right?
Yep. Yeah, because you're using, I believe you tend, I think it defaults to the HTTP URLs instead of the SSH ones. I tend to default to SSH URLs
Hmm.
just by default. It means I have SSH keys set up and
Yeah, I don't have
life's a
SSH
little
keys
easier.
set up. I have SSH keys set up in WSL, but not in the is this is CMD, isn't it? No, this is
No, you're
PowerShell.
in PowerShell,
But
and
I don't have keys set up in PowerShell yet.
yeah.
So at some point
Well,
I'm going to do that.
fortunately, Windows makes it much easier these days, considering they actually have an SSH distribution that's native.
All right. So now if I so
Refresh that.
so just refresh
There they are.
that, and as as should be the case, my local files are now uh, my local files are now in the GitHub repo. And so, by the way, I'll add, I'll do this off stream, but because we're a little bit, well, actually we kind of mixed a couple discussions here, so I think this is very useful and where we're going next. Uh, but so I will off stream add the Python Flask code I used that we looked at last week. I'll add that offline, and then I will put a link to this GitHub repo on the web page along with with the stream info for today. So if anybody if thinks it might be useful to have those have those sort of test programs or send little toy programs to play with. They're certainly more than within the not fit for any particular purpose license. They're more than welcome to play with that. Okay, so I think it was kind of a useful introduction because you think about it, PXLib, of course, has got the same, except he knows how to run it. But he has the same setup, right? I mean, he's got VS Code, and so he could connect to, and in this case, of course, this isn't the repo we're going to work in, but he could connect to this repo, pull it down, make changes, push those up. We could have multiple branches, so we could have things happen in parallel without getting in the way of each other. And I think over time we will see those kinds of things happen. Okay, so this is something I want to do because I think it kind of lays the groundwork for how we're going to coordinate the work we're planning to do. That makes sense. So let's see. What do you want? So I think this is kind of your show for the next bit here. Do you want me to bring that? Do you want to go into Jamboard, or you want to go into your Google Drawing to talk
Let's
about
do
the?
the drawing
Okay.
probably. We can talk about the move you around here really fast. We can talk about the architecture a little bit, try and get sort of the what we want to build sort of out. So, and I think we talked about this a little bit previously. Um, the tool is it's sort of it worked itself out of my brain. First ODG, also the discussion about the local OBS commands, and a bunch of other things. But it came in to be a really useful idea in that it's going to give us an opportunity to show off some front end frameworking, which I think is a really important conversation to have with sort of modern web development because modern front ends are essentially full on applications these days, and trying to do that with vanilla JavaScript, while doable and probably more performant than some of these, is hard, and it quickly becomes harder. So, front-end frameworks like Vue, Vue, Angular, React and Vue are vying for the top spot here. React just because it was it was created by Facebook at the time, so it had some initial buy-in right there. So we're gonna build the application out in Vue. And so let me start doodling here. So right in the center, I'm gonna go ahead and just draw a little box. It's gonna be blue because that's what Google likes to
I
default
hate
to.
the
But that's
default color.
I hate the default
And
color.
you
I
can't
don't know
change it. I hate it with a
why.
vengeance. I always change
So
it.
we'll go gray. Gray's nice. Um, so this we'll call this. Let me just put a little text box here. This is LST in all its glory, right? And we'll just make that much bigger.
And that is
Okay.
that is our super brilliant abbreviation for local
That
streaming tool.
because I was like, I don't know, I don't know what to call it. I'm bad at names. I'm a developer, not a designer. I am not a creative in that way. Um, anyway, point being, so that's the tool, right? And so what? Sorry, I lost my train of thought a little bit. What this gives us, sorry, that there it is. What this gives us the opportunity to sort of talk about is front-end frameworks, like I talked about, but also from a web architecture standpoint, lets us show off a couple of different sort of methods that are used for essentially application to application conversations, right? So the big one, which is really very cool and is becoming more popular, that we're going to be end up using a lot of is WebSockets, because that's how we'll connect to Twitch chat to manage to Twitch commands, and I'll start listing these because that will be useful. So the idea we had is that this little thing will handle Twitch chat commands, right? So we can do local actions based on chat commands. Obviously, we need to figure out you have to deal with restrictions and all sorts of other things. That'll be a fun little conversation to have. We want to be able to react to channel events. So subs, follows, bits, donations will come later because that means you're talking to other things, and right now we're just sticking to Twitch.
Mm-hmm.
And then from there, there's some other things. There's the Twitch API it's much more heavily aimed at like full-on extension developers, not sort of managing your day-to-day stream interactions. So there aren't a lot of API endpoints I think would be useful. I'm sure down the road someone will point out, hey, it would be great if it could do this. And we'll be like, oh yeah, there's a REST API for that. We just hadn't thought about that yet. But for now, one of the sort of just to show what REST APIs look like, there is a REST API that lets you create clips. So my thought was it'd be really cool if I'm sitting here streaming and I don't necessarily have my own stream in front of me. Instead of going, hey chat, make that clip, or hey mod, can you clip for me? Especially if I'm a smaller streamer and I don't have a mod, I can just hit a button, it'll auto create a clip, send me back the edit URL, and I can tinker with it after stream. Cool. Those are the first pops of ideas that we're gonna try and run down. So to do those things, I already mentioned we're gonna show off a front end framework called Vue. So I'm gonna sort of now list sort of some of the internal architecture components and move things around so that it's legible. So to get what I want, we're looking at Vue as a front-end framework because I like Vue and it's what I work with on a regular basis. So I'm being lazy and not trying to learn something new here. We're going to wrap it in an Electron application, which Electron is essentially it's a Chrome browser, and there's a love-hate relationship with Electron. It has its upsides and its downsides, but it does make for delivering a local application as opposed to a web server much easier. So we're going to wrap a front-end framework with Electron, and then because of things, we're also going to run a tiny little web server within the Electron application that's going to handle some of the things that we can't do otherwise. So good times will be had by all. There are going to be like 3 different ways for all those pieces to communicate with each other.
Just to say, so ODG says donations are simple. They're already in his code, so we can ultimately look in
Yeah, we'll
the code
also
that
have
he
to look at
shared
it.
and pull that in. if when we get to that point. I think maybe just to recap, we talked about this a little bit. I think 2 weeks ago. So in theory, we could use a Chrome browser to run. I mean, this will be JavaScript code. Problem is, in part, we're going to run into problems like the ones we had last week, where Chrome on purpose is very compartmentalized because the code in Chrome, of course, came from potentially an unreliable source. So there are restrictions on what can actually happen, what a web browser can actually do to control things outside the web browser. In fact, the answer is very little. So part of the reason I think for the Electron app is we wanted something that is local and that has more capabilities to do things locally.
Yep, that is in fact exactly it. That was why I wanted this, is because I'm sure there are ways you can do it, but it starts making me nervous when you start dealing with with uh, essentially a hosted web application talking to a local service.
Right.
That feels inappropriate to
And
me. So
from a workflow perspective, the user would install an Electron app much like they would install any other program, any other application.
yeah, it looks like any other application. In fact, VS Code, which we were using earlier, I don't believe is a pure Electron application, but it is a browser-based application. There are a number of them that sort of grew up out of that.
Yeah. So the right, so the difference being that in this case the user has through the Windows safety triggers basically clicked someplace saying yes, I want this app installed. And in return, Windows gives that app a bit more freedom to do things on the local machine.
Namely, the big one that we're going to want to do that I don't believe, and I haven't tried, but I don't believe is possible to do, which is connect to a local WebSocket server on OBS, which I'm
Mm-hmm.
extending my drawing out now, so we will talk about all of these things in just a second. So that one, this is the Twitch REST API. We go. So those are sort of the three things I was talking about. So this one, these two, in fact, are both going to be done over something called WebSockets, which is basically a persistent connection. Um, I can constantly be sending events back and forth. So the server can send me an event and I can send an event back. Obviously, we're mostly going to be interested in the other way, server generated events. The Twitch REST API, sort of as it sounds, I'm going to be talking to that one over HTTP. Right, so that is a pure web request. I'm going to go out there and say, hey, send me this web page using the GET protocol, and it's going to happily do that.
And pub/sub is publish subscribe. We probably ought to define that
Yes,
a little bit.
apologies. Yes, publish, subscribe. So it turns out Twitch, I think long term they're planning on consolidating around what they're calling Twitch channel events. I believe. I'm sorry, I don't have the dev documentation up right now, but I found it late last night. But the current implementation is what they call their publish subscribe, their pub/sub interface. All of them are done over WebSockets, just a question of what supports what. And so that's going to be a fun little exploration that we will get into. And then Twitch REST API, that will just require, like I said, that's just your basic boring, hey, send me this thing.
Mm-hmm.
So from there, I'm going to draw one more box because we want to get the entire architecture sort of out and doodle. I'm going to leave it sort of down here.
And by the way, I'll put this document into the onto the web page, so it'll be available after the stream.
So this little box here is also local. I realize I can do dark gray for local. This is OBS. I think Slobs will support this theoretically. I haven't tried. I don't know if it supports OBS
That's
plugins.
Streamlabs OBS.
Thank you. Yep. I'm sorry. Abbreviations I'm the worst about. Running what is called OBS WebSockets is a plugin that exposes most of OBS's functionality. So scene switching, scene creation, I think, a number of other things via WebSockets server. So again, it's gonna be WebSockets all the way down,
Mm-hmm.
to quote the loveliness. And so we will be communicating with OBS. If I can get the right connection point, that will work. Whatever, via WebSockets again.
And I think for people that have done for people that have done any sort of more high-end streaming, that this is somewhat reminiscent of the Stream Decks, where you have sort of a specialized keyboard that lets you switch scenes and those kinds of
Yeah.
things. A lot of streamers use those. To my knowledge, they use custom keyboard shortcuts. They issue custom keyboard shortcuts to talk to OBS via keyboard
Right.
shortcuts. ODG says this is going to be interesting. My knowledge isn't great on this stuff, so I had issues using the Twitch Socket API. Yeah,
Yeah. So WebSockets.
it's pretty new as far as I know. It is the term socket, by the way, got borrowed from the original internet
Yep.
documentation. So in TCP and UDP, the transport protocols that actually carry information on the internet, a socket is a combination of an address, which identifies, in most cases, a computer, although technically a network interface on a computer. Uh, if you
Excuse
combine
me.
that with the port number, which is essentially an identifier for one of the programs running on that computer, that combination of address and port number is called a socket. And it's sort of the visual mnemonic here is it's something you plug into and data flows in and out of it, much like like the electrical socket on the wall. So that's where the term comes from. Except now we're doing this over. Is this actually over HTTP? Is this actually HTTP?
I think we decided it's not HTTP. I haven't looked at
Well,
I
we'll
haven't
have.
looked at the
So
standards
this
document. We
this will
should pull it up
yeah
next week.
this will be one of the sort of intro topics. I think we're going to pull up both the standard and maybe some tools to figure out what we're actually doing here.
Mm-hmm.
But in
To be fun,
essence, we're
you
creating
should
a
pull out
socket.
Wireshark.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what I'm planning to do. And well so. But so when we talk about WebSockets, it means that we're actually creating sort of a persistent connection, much like that SSH connection I was using to my other computer last week. That is a socket-to-socket connection running over TCP. So it's something similar to that. And um, so rather than having basically a Stream Deck essentially send a keystroke combination into Windows, which Windows then hands to OBS, which OBS then says, that means I need to switch scenes. We can, in this case, we can actually directly program to program without the operating system really caring. We can send commands straight into OBS, and I suspect that once we get that set up, it's going to be a good bit more effective and may actually expose more capabilities from within OBS than you could get to with the keyboard shortcuts. In chat, ODG says the socket API I was using isn't even documented anymore. I think tried to find the other day and it was all the REST API and pub
Well,
sub stuff. Yeah, which makes sense. I
I
mean,
think last I looked, their REST API they had 5 versions before now. They just deprecated, or not, I don't know, just probably last year or two deprecated version 5, so we're on to version 6 now. So that's fun. It's a good. I mean, version deprecation, they're doing it well. They have a version demarcation so that you can still refer to the old APIs at least temporarily. But yeah, there have been a lot of versions of the Twitch API at this point.
Right, and so the reason we decided we needed a web server in our Electron app, of course, is a little bit tricky, but it's a limitation of OBS.
Yeah.
If we want to get OBS for people that haven't used it, and I'll think about a way to maybe show that without just totally trying to show OBS while you're streaming is really bizarre and it looks really strange.
Maybe you can stream my desktop. I'll pull up my OBS.
That's a good idea. Yeah.
And
We'll
I'll just make
do
sure
that.
I'm on a scene that doesn't have the desktop, so we don't get the infinite mirror look.
Exactly. But so OBS has a fairly long but defined list of places it can pull information from to build scenes, right? And so what you're looking at right now is a combination of a couple of video windows, and a capture of one of my displays, essentially. And you can put static text on the screen. I think in some scenes I have pxlib labeled, and some I don't. I don't know why that's not consistent, but I'll get that fixed eventually. So I can do that, but there are not very many. I mean, there's a good list of options, but most of them are images, video, audio, various variations on that. If I'm trying to inject dynamic information into the display that you're seeing on the stream, really the only feasible one that all these overlays use is what's called a web source. So you basically turn OBS into a web browser that pulls information. ODG says you can start a second one as administrator to get two versions running at the same time. Yeah, I would want to. And he said you might want to test that offline first, though. Yeah, yep. Probably. OBS is sometimes temperamental, so we want to try that out before we go down that path. So anyway, make a long story short, if I'm trying to dynamically put information that's overlaid, hence the name, on top of the video that's going out right now, I almost have to do that with a web-based URL. And so regardless of what our LST app does, to get so we can get commands to OBS through WebSockets, but we can't hand OBS information we want to display in the video through WebSockets. We have to have OBS retrieve that via basically a web page, and so we have to run a little web server that can do that for us.
Yes, and fortunately you can do that from Electron. Although I will say I went through several iterations of testing different things out of curiosity, because one of the things you may or may not have run into this at some point, but some applications will register themselves as a custom scheme, so where normally you type in HTTP to get to a web page, sometimes you might type in file : or I'll go old school FTP or something like that. Applications are perfectly allowed to register a custom one, and Electron has some very simple ways to register a custom scheme.
Yeah, and by the way, the two of the more common ones, but probably the most common right now, Zoom.
Oh yeah, I believe it. Do they have a
yes.
a custom scheme?
Yep. Because if you get an invite to a Zoom teleconference, it'll have a Zoom : it resolves to a Zoom URL that then your browser base says, oh, do you want me to kick off the Zoom app? Unless you've given it permanent permission to do that. So that's a good example, and Teams does the same thing. WebEx does the same thing, but you can do it for pretty much everything. Steam does it. Steam does it too, doesn't it?
Yes, Steam has a custom protocol. I think it's Steam.
Yeah, I know the Vortex game modding software has one, so you can click on a mod on the I'm drawing a blank. Whatever the modding site is called, Nexus. You can click on and say I want that mod. And you click on the download link, and it actually launches Vortex and installs the files in the right place and does all the things that a web browser wouldn't know how to do. So there are lots of examples where that's done. And like you said, we can do that out of Electron. The problem being,
OBS browser source only supports HTTP and file schemes. It does not support any custom schemes outside of that. Now I was tempted to open a pull request and tinker with some code and get them to be like, hey, will you let me add a field where I can have custom schemes? But that seems like a lot of work for one particular application when we can just spin up a web server. And maybe down the road I will, because that's being a good steward of open source.
Yeah. ODG says ODG in the chat just said he explains a normal OBS overlay is just a web page with a transparent background, which is absolutely correct. Yeah. Now, to use the term pull request, so let's define that, because that's actually a really good segue here.
Managed to create one unintentionally. I like it. Pull requests.
And so I'm going to bring up my my GitHub page here.
Yep. You will see right across the top, the third tab over is pull requests. It is a first-class citizen of GitHub. It is not technically something that is defined by Git. It is a concept that wraps around Git. So Git doesn't really have a concept of the pull request. What a pull request, however, is particularly in open source, although speaking from my own professional life, we've created a branching strategy that uses pull requests rather heavily because I think it provides useful history. But within the open source community, a pull request typically happens when I have forked, define that. It's easy enough, distributed version control. I can create my own copy on GitHub of an open source repository. So for OBS browser,
let me show this real quick. So this repo is it's a project that we did some number of years ago. One of my students did, and so this repo is actually owned by him. You can see it's KCHMCK is his username, and that's his repo. But I have a copy of it.
Mm-hmm.
And what I did is I cloned or forked his repo, so it looks like mine. I can edit, but it's a copy. It doesn't touch. It obviously doesn't touch his code in any way, shape, or form.
And it is a standalone copy, right? If your student were to in the future delete that repository for whatever reason, your copy would remain, right? You have right. created a fork that is yours. It is on you to make sure you're still obeying the original license terms, but Correct. Beyond that, the code is now yours.
Yeah, that's the nature of open source and open repositories.
Exactly. So back to pull requests. So say I've forked something and I want to make some changes. I make some changes. So in the example I gave earlier, I modify the OBS browser scheme handler, I think is the file. I don't remember. I was digging through the repository the other day. I modify that to allow for adding certain custom schemes, right? You want the user to manually add their custom schemes so that you're not just randomly opening stuff.
Right.
But I support that, and it's great, wonderful. I would not do that and then push it directly to their repository. They don't know who I am. They have no reason to trust my code. They're not going to accept my push.
So we would neither of us would have write access to
exactly.
to the
so
repo.
I would make the changes, push them to my fork of the OBS browser plugin. And then I'd go to OBS browser plugin, their version of the Git repository, and I'd go to pull request and I'd hit create new pull request, and I would tell GitHub, hey, I think that the owners of OBS browser should merge my changes from my fork, this branch on my fork, into theirs. All right, so there's new pull request up there, and that will notify all of the folks who are members of the OBS browser plugin there. It'll tell them, hey, there's this new pull request that someone wants to contribute code to your repository. And so hopefully, ideally, someone from that team that has whatever permissions are required will go and look at my pull requests and poke around and be like, well, yeah, your code's fine, but you need to reformat it this way, or no, we're not going to accept this because of reasons XYZ, or potentially just close it with no answer because they don't have time, and open source is hard, and I don't blame them. It's a lot of work.
Yeah. So it's a combination of like a to-do item, right? Or a
In
task,
fact,
right?
yeah.
But at the same time, at least in its original form, uh, also involved not just a to-do item saying, you know, I've started working on, or maybe I finished working on this new feature or this change, but it also obviously very explicit said I'd like for you to move that code into into the official distribution of the code.
Into the upstream repository is
Right.
what we would say. That
Right.
in the open source world, that's the upstream
It's an
repository.
upstream, right? Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And
And
so
that's where so I think that's where that term started. It isn't anything that and in fact, we used fetch, but so in Git, fetch simply synchronizes the sort of behind the scenes
the metadata, if you will.
metadata in my local repository with the master, or with the origin in the upstream, and I can then merge that into my working directory. If I do a git pull, I do an automatic merge. So a lot of times when I do this, I will pull to get all the new stuff integrated into my working directory.
Yeah, except for in very rare circumstances where I'm curious about metadata, or there are some deploy circumstances where I need to use it. I use git pull as well. Git fetch is just useful when you're trying to track something specific, do something very specific.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Right. So I'm gonna I'm gonna jump out of here, but so that's the now what we talked about off stream yesterday, that might be useful to talk about here, is that you use pull requests even within a team where everybody technically has the ability to commit code.
And that comes back to, there was a conversation in chat, so I'll try and summarize that kind of quickly. Branching strategies are a whole long conversation. So
okay, right, yeah.
Git. So going back to sort of the architecture of Git, and I think this is true of, again, I date myself here. I came in after SVN was really a thing. Git was the new hotness on the block, and so I learned Git from the ground up. Git has this concept of branches, right? So say I want to, essentially I want to try something out. So I create a new branch from a certain point in time, right? A certain point in code. I create that new branch and I start adding code to that branch. That means that my source branch, I would try and doodle this, but again, I'm on a mouse. If you wanna try,
I'll do some doodling here.
Nice. So I'm on a branch and I'm adding code to that branch. That in no way, shape, or form affects the source branch in the Hello World repository that we showed off, the main branch, right? Other people have different names for their core branch.
So say oops, I didn't realize I was still on a marker or something, paintbrush. All right, so I've got my my source code file, and at this point, and it is part of the repository, so it's being tracked. There's lots of metadata. I'm not going to draw that here. There's metadata being tracked about this, so that if I make changes, I can look up and I see what happened. But I may not want to make a change here because maybe this is the code I'm currently shipping, and I don't want to modify it in an uncontrolled way. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to leave this one alone, and I'm going to create a copy, an exact duplicate of that file, and I'm going to start modifying it.
And technically, I mean, that's a good word. Technically, it's not a copy. It's just that I've stored the state of the file at a certain point in time, and Git knows enough how to change it back.
Right. that is absolutely correct, and that's how it's done behind the scenes. It looks, for all practical
It,
purposes, like you have a copy, right?
absolutely no. It is
And
an excellent analogy.
and so it's essentially, um, and let's do it this way. So we just saw that GitHub wants to by default say everything's, you start out with a branch, a grouping of content that is on the main branch, and so maybe what I'm doing, I'm not sure if it's going to work or not, so I'm going to call this experiment. And the neat thing is, so again, this is what I'm seeing in my working directory, like what you saw in VS Code, right? And so once I've switched to the experiment branch, and I start making my changes, for all practical purposes, this is the project for me. I can build it, I can try it, I can experiment with it, I make more changes, and let's say somebody comes by and says, "Oh my God, there's a bug in our shipping code. We got to go fix it right now." It takes me one command. So right now I'm happily working away. Let me grab I think that's a highlighter. So I'm happily working along. This is where I'm working. This is me, and I'm happily doing this. And all of a sudden I get pulled away and said, "Hey, you got to fix this. You've got to fix this right now. It's urgent that we fix the bug in the shipping code." So it wouldn't do me any good to do anything with my experimental code, because that has all sorts of stuff I don't want a customer to get, right? So it takes one command for me to change my working directory back to the main branch, right? And so this stuff hasn't disappeared. I can go back to it once I fix the bug. But this branch was untouched by any of the changes I made. So this is the code that's shipping. I can go in here. I can go in here. I can create a new copy of this file that has the bug fixed. That can be shipped. And I can tell people, tell the customer support people, go tell the customer that there's an update. They haven't installed the update, and then I switch back to my experiment. Everything changes back. It doesn't have this in it unless I want it to. That bug fix I just made is not going to be there, but I'm going to be right where I left off, right? And so
typically good practice is to do a rebase at that point, just
right,
to have,
of course,
especially for a bug
right,
fix. But
right, of course.
obviously that's.
But so the and so what now let's loop back to where this discussion came from, right? So in terms of a group developing new features, right? So you might want to pick up here. So where does the pull request come in? Within a team. This is
right,
on the same repository.
Within a team. So say I am developing a new widget, right? Because widgets are a great example. I'm developing a new widget that's going to go on our homepage, and obviously it's not ready yet. I'm figuring out all the details of it, and eventually I am done with. So I've checked out this experimental branch. I would probably call it feat-widgets.
Yeah.
I'm on feat-widgets for the most part, except when I have to switch back and fix bugs. Eventually, though, I'm done. Feat-widgets is done. I've kept the only code that's on that feat-widgets branch has to do with that one widget, right? So no scope creep, no contamination of my code, right? So the idea is you've kept your context very tight.
I can't type.
I can't either. It's fine. Once I'm ready to launch, right, my new feature, I will open a pull request, right? And so I'm going to say, hey, I want to merge this code from the same repository, but this branch into this branch. So basically, I'd have an arrow from the last file, last commit on feat-widgets to main. The reason we do it that way instead of, because it's faster, and in fact, really it is easier. Although there is a GitHub pull request plugin for VS Code, which means I never leave my editor when I create a pull request. But hey, it is technically faster and easier for me just to be like, okay, cool, I'm ready. This is ready. git checkout master, git merge, feat dash widgets, push, right? And that's all I'd have to do to merge my changes into the
Right.
main branch. The reason we do tend to do pull requests, and this is on many ways a conversation, right? Figuring out a branching strategy is very much a team specific conversation or a personal choice. It is in no way, shape, or form objective to a point. Obviously, having a branching strategy is better than not. That's about the only thing objective about it. So I've got a pull request. What that gives me is twofold. One, it creates a history in GitHub outside of Git because typically you delete branches after sort of they've gone away, right? Because otherwise you have this very cluttered repository with dozens of branches that you haven't touched in 2 years. So I have a history of it in GitHub. It'll tell me what files were changed, who changed them, which commits there were, any conversations around that pull request, and that conversation is the secondary benefit. Code reviews or peer programming essentially is a really important, I'm going to call it feature, but however you want to describe it, a really important part of modern development practices. If I push code up, it is often important and useful even both for myself and for a coworker, or in the case of an open source project, a co-collaborator, for them to look at my code and essentially critique it, right?
Mm-hmm,
It's a
mm-hmm,
chance for
mm-hmm.
them to look at it and say, you chose to go direction X. Can you explain to me why? Because maybe they have a different opinion about how you solve a problem. Because programming, right? There's essentially infinite solutions to any given problem, and some of them are better than others, and some of them are purely subjective. So if I've never seen a solution to a given problem, I may ask, I've never seen a particular solution to a given problem. I may ask the code committer, hey, well, what made you choose to do it this way? And obviously, I mean,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
there's some delicacy around asking questions like that because it's a creative process and you get protective quickly.
You mean you could get into engineering arguments very quickly?
Yes, very quickly. If you've set up a good culture around code reviews, however, the person will look at it and go, oh, I like doing it this way because of X, Y, and Z. And two things can happen. Either I've learned a new way of doing it, and I go, oh, that is much better than the way I've learned it. I've learned something. Or three things can happen. The second is, or I can come back and say, oh, that's a really interesting solution. Have you seen solution X? I think it's more performant.
Mm.
Perhaps you should try that. The third option is they're both equally good. I can tell them about mine or not, but there's no net benefit necessarily to the application itself, except I've learned a new approach and perhaps my collaborator has learned a new approach to a particular solution.
And this is sort of a dicey thing, but depending on the organizational culture, there may be a set of coding standards in place that sort of
Yep.
narrow the options for individual
Mm-hmm.
developers.
Yeah.
I
Oh,
mean,
I
Google
and I,
Google certainly has a
yeah.
set of prescribed tools, for example,
Right.
in their development
And
environment.
as having been the driving force behind modernization projects for a couple of years now, I could say that having those standardized tools is really very important because otherwise you end up with a proliferation of tools.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And coworker and I were chatting literally today. We have a project where there are 3 different libraries installed that all handle styling select lists.
Yeah,
At
that
different points in time, someone decided, oh, I like this one, and
yep,
then not realizing they'd installed it, because it's 2 years on, someone installed a different one, and then again, and someone installed a third one.
yeah,
So having an agreed upon solution, that's a very
yeah.
simplistic example, obviously, but having an agreed upon solution means you don't have those issues.
Yeah, and I think next stream we'll talk a little bit about the. I mean, this kind of gets down to we talked about like the stand up meetings
Mm-hmm.
and some of the agile development. I think we're going to
Yeah,
spend some
talking
time
about
next stream talking about agile and because in some ways, in a well managed software project, these things shouldn't happen and shouldn't come as surprises. There should be
yeah,
conversations going on in between the pull requests as new features are being talked about, and we're talking about the backlog slash queue of things, and there should be conversations going on about early on about how do we approach this, and then somebody gets handed the task, but they have some concept of what the rest of the team expects them to do and how they expect them to do it.
We had ODG come in and say we also had the no bugs allowed system where it has to go into a test branch first for full testing on the latest baseline before being allowed onto the main baseline.
Yeah.
And that is super common even now. They've moved away from having a dedicated test branch. Right? I say they. This is sort of the common practice. For automated testing, typically what happens is when the pull requests, and actually this goes back to pull requests, one of the other things that pull requests can do if you have your environment set up properly is run your entire suite of automated tests on a dedicated environment that you do not have to manage. So I open a pull request and GitHub, or heck, Bitbucket does it, GitLab does it, AWS's code pipeline does it. I think Azure's does it somehow or another. They all will run your unit and your integration testing automatically in an environment, so you don't have to, and it will then give you feedback in your pull request. Hey, one of your tests failed. You really shouldn't merge this code.
Right, and so ODG was saying, that sort of no bugs allowed test branch is only really used for large teams with a dedicated test team.
For manual testing, I'd agree with that.
For manual testing, yes,
but for
and more continuous integration with bigger teams, as you said as well. So what I've seen. I was on the consumer side. I was basically the user, not the developer. But I was, part of the basically the sort of the acceptance, basically of the agile. In the agile text, I was one of the stakeholders. And so what I kind of observed is that the university, for their web applications, runs a dedicated test development QA. They run development, test, QA, and then production. And there are rules about when an application can advance from one to the next. And so, as a stakeholder, I would get a request to test a new feature in the test environment. And when I signed off on it, then they would move it to QA. We test it again, and then it went into production. So that's not terribly. So I think that's. I don't. I mean, I don't know how organizations how
so
do that, but having a separate test environment at the very least is obviously a good thing.
So with sort of really modern CI/CD approaches, what happens is again when this part is a little bit more depends on your infrastructure. When I open a pull request or when I push a branch to the central repository, your CI/CD pipeline kicks off and spins up an environment for that branch. That is continuously kept up to date, and tests are run on it that I can do manual QA against. And then when you merge that pull request into main, said environment goes away. So you tend to not have sort of that number of distinct environments, but you constantly have a test environment for any given feature or bug or whatever.
Yeah, and so there's a couple of things that will probably sort of splatter in here over the next several streams, because one of the test environments I work with is BuildBot, and in fact I'm kind of working on a refresh of that right now, so that might be a good stream at some point to throw in and actually set up, actually created kind of like a tiny BuildBot environment that that can do some of that automated testing.
Yeah, we can kind of compare the two because BuildBot is one, but GitHub supports its own CI/CD environment called Actions, so we can kind of
so I think that could be kind of fun at some point to throw in, and a lot of times, and this is something that I've been learning over the last couple of years. A lot of times, now that we have all the cloud services support containerized applications. that makes creating sort of dedicated test environments and then throwing them away right away a
Yep.
whole lot easier. So we're probably going to take a look at that as well.
Yeah,
We're
hopefully, I'm
just
hoping we get a chance to chat in that.
yeah. ODG says for PC code, it's a lot cheaper to do automated testing.
Yeah.
Plus involve dedicated hardware. Yeah, so that's quite expensive. TV set-top
Oh,
boxes and racks with capture
yeah.
cards. Yeah,
Yeah, I
that
can't imagine. I mean, unless someone create a virtualized environment, which I guess would be possible, but
yeah
that's
that
hard.
makes it much harder. Yes. And in fact uh, so the university, which has basically this four-tier environment for the software web applications, has traditionally struggled with test environments for the networking features because that involves dedicated hardware and that gets expensive really quickly.
Yeah.
And so basically, I think the last time and it's been a while now, so I couldn't speak to what they do now, but last time I checked, the network engineers would basically check out shelf spares to set up test networks, knowing that if something went down in the network, somebody would come running for the box in their office and grab it to use it as a replacement. But basically the shelf spares get sort of pushed into service for test environments, because that is definitely hard and that makes it expensive. So I think looking at the clock here, I think we're kind of getting to the end of our stream here. It is a little after 9:30. And I think we're at a nice stopping point.
Yep. I think one of these days we'll actually get to LST and to actually show some of the code as it's getting built up.
So again, couple notes here. The next stream is being 2 weeks because of the U.S. Thanksgiving holiday. There will not be a stream next week because Thursday falls onto that holiday. So we're not going to try to stream then.
We both anticipate being covered quite full of turkey
or something else. But we will definitely have. We at least are not planning any large gatherings. But
Nope.
in my case, there will be a very small gathering and outdoors. So we'll have some things to do. I know lots of people will be on Zoom calls and those kinds of things, FaceTime types call get-togethers. So we're not going to stream next week, and I'll put that on the website. But we'll be back in 2 weeks. And at some point, as I said, there's a very good chance that PXLip will stream some of the actual coding work on his stream, and I'll let everybody know when that happens. But in 2 weeks, we might well have some experimental code that we can run and sort of see what's going on. But I have not worked with WebSockets. I really want to see that, and so we might add something to the Hello World repo to have a little Hello World WebSocket program running. I think that'd be kind of fun. But we might have some beginnings of LST in place. But again, this is what we're doing here is only in part building that application, although PXLip and I are both pretty eager to get that to work. But we also, I think, want to make the stream a place where people can come and sort of get a sense of how this stuff is actually being built. What happens behind the scenes. How are these applications developed? Is it so different from the way back 30 years ago when I was writing commercial code? That was so different in terms of the development cycles, the project management techniques, the deployment cycles. So these discussions are going to continue to be part of the stream because that's part of what I want to have happen, because I think it's something that outside of the IT community people don't really talk all that much about. ODG says I've had tests fail on my system when someone went and borrowed one of the boxes from the test track. Yeah, that's what would happen. He also says have a good holiday. I know it's a big one over there, like our Christmas holiday. Enjoy yourselves. Yeah, thanks a lot. And yeah, again, PXLip's right. Thanks for sticking around. And ODG says probably still need to watch the VOD back. My brain is only half working after stream, and it's 2:40 a.m. your time. I thought that was the case. Have you eaten today? And of course, I know you were kind of struggling with a with a neck issue. Anyways, it was good fun being in your stream earlier. Sorry I couldn't stick around. I need to check on that game you were playing. It actually looked pretty cool. You had a Cornish pasty. That yes. Oh, that sounds yummy. Wonderful. That definitely sounds tasty.
Yeah, pasty is a tasty thing.
Oh yes. All right, so with that, I think we're going to sign off here. Again, thanks everyone for watching, either live or on the VODs or on YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube, thanks for checking it out. If you're on YouTube, hit the whatever it is called on YouTube, the subscribe button. And if you're on, if you're,
it is subscribe now, isn't it?
It is. Well, there's subscribe and join on.
Yeah, that's right.
Join is the paid one. Subscribe is it's just you get updates.
Essentially
when we post
backwards
new stuff.
to Twitch.
Yeah, backwards to Twitch. So if you're on YouTube, please hit the subscribe button down there, and if you're watching the VODs on Twitch, be so kind and hit the follow there. That would be nice. For those of you in the U.S., have a very pleasant and enjoyable and most importantly safe Thanksgiving holiday, and we will be back in 2 weeks. Good night, everyone.
Good night.